Everybody, good to be with you today. I'm here from Los Angeles. My name is Steve Saccone, and I want to talk to you about relational intelligence and why I think it's so critical to church leadership and the advancement of the movement of Jesus. When a lot of people think of the term relational intelligence, maybe their mind goes to dating intelligence or lack thereof. But my book, Relational Intelligence, is not really about rejection management or how to get a girl who's out of your league to say yes to go on a date with you. Although women, I know you wish men knew more of these things. And then there's other people who, when they think of relational intelligence, they might think of the socially awkward person. Maybe it's someone who's all too similar to Michael Scott from the TV show The Office. It's the person who says the wrong thing at the wrong time and doesn't even realize it, or they're clueless about how their behavior affects those around them. They maybe are the type of person that just embodies self-unawareness, in its fullest capacity. But I think the truth of the matter is we have a human tendency to more easily recognize the deficits and flaws in someone else before we recognize it in ourselves. And Jesus talks about this when he says, be careful that you don't recognize the speck in someone else's eye before first looking at the log in your own. And then Paul says to Timothy in chapter 4 of 1 Timothy, this little phrase, he says, pay close attention to yourself, which he's not saying be more self-obsessed because, hey, we have a ton of that in our world. We don't need any more. But he is saying, pay attention to who you are, to your strengths, to your weaknesses, to your deficits, to your flaws, and go on the journey of becoming who God intended you to be. And so when we think about relational intelligence, yeah, a lot of times we think in terms of our other people's deficits or flaws. But actually what I focus more on is what does relational intelligence look like? Because it's a lot easier to identify relational unintelligence, but I think sometimes we don't have a picture of what relational intelligence looks like, which I think every leader can go on the journey of becoming what I call a relational genius, doing what I call increasing your RQ, relational quotient. And so how do we move to a place where we begin to acquire and develop relational intelligence in our leadership? Because I think if we do, it's going to affect how we do mission, how we are able to catalyze momentum, how we can become more strategic in terms of how we relate to people. We can create more quality, better relationships. We can learn to value people in deeper, greater, more unique ways. And so what I've laid out in my book is 6 core traits or 6 core roles of a relational genius. One of them is what I call a story collector, which really is built off the idea that Paul talks about in Philippians chapter 2, where he says, in humility, consider others better than yourself. In other words, be interested in people around you. And I know that's really simple in concept, but it's incredibly difficult to do. In fact, it's a rare quality, specifically in leaders. And that's where the story collector begins the journey, being interested in others. And along the way, they learn to ask the right kinds of questions in a way that draws the unique facets of another person out. There's another role of a relational genius that I call the energy carrier. And that's someone who doesn't just read the tone in a room, but they're able to set the tone in a room or in a conversation that they're in. In other words, it starts on the inside and moves to the outside. There's someone who on the inside, they're fully present. The allness of who they are is brought into every moment, every conversation, every team meeting, every group meeting, and they actually bring their energy to that moment. And as a result, they're able to increase their capacity to change the tone in the room. Because, we've all been in rooms where maybe there's a kind of a downcast environment, or maybe there's an awkward moment that happened, and you have to ask yourself the question, especially if you're the leader, how do I step into this? How do I make the most of this? How do I change this environment so that I can move people forward or address an issue that needs to be addressed? So that's really what, in essence, an energy carrier does. They set the tone and the energy in the environments they're in. Then there's this third role that I refer to as the conversational futurist, which I know it sounds like a superhero, but hey, we all want to be superheroes, right? And someone who does this is someone who takes their conversations and their dialogue and they use the words as vehicles to move people forward in their lives. They take people from where they are and move them into a different and better future that God has for their life. And there's all different strategic ways to do that in a way that we value people along the way, but we also move them forward. We challenge them. Sometimes we confront them on things that must be confronted. And then there's the fourth role, what I call the compelling relator, which is about how do we learn better ways to relate to people in more compelling ways, more interesting ways, where they're drawn to not only us, but ultimately into the movement of Jesus and moving forward in their life. So we learn better ways to relate to people. And then there's a fifth role, the likable hero, which really is about increasing our likability and not underestimating the power of likability in our leadership. It's hard to identify sometimes the unlikable traits that we have, which we don't like to admit or notice or recognize. But this is important to leadership and in terms of influence. And then the sixth role would be what I call the disproportionate investor, which is all about how do you strategically invest your relational energy into the right kind of people where they reinvest it in others and not invest it into what Haggai calls people who are like purses with holes in it, where you invest in them, but they're more like consumers. It's more like investing into a black hole those people don't go reinvest it. And this is ultimately what Jesus did with his disciples. He invested in the right people, and in the end, it advanced the movement of Jesus forward and took it to places that go far beyond what we can imagine our own leadership. I think we need more attention to that. So my hope is that you will go on the journey with me of becoming more relationally intelligent, that you would learn what it means to become a relational genius, which I think every single one of us has the capacity to become. So if you want to know where to begin, one, you can get my book, or two, you can go to my website. There's a free online relational intelligence assessment. So it might be scary to know your RQ. I'm not sure, but go take it. And there's all kinds of other free stuff there too. So good to be with you. Thanks so much.